Hello, I'm Ryan F9, and this headlight is enough to get home. See, I can spot the ruts and rocks to get out of a ride gone sideways. This looks pretty good. Now let's turn them on. Holy mother of Ra! I have become Day, the destroyer of nights! Well, never mind getting out. I might as well stay here, crushing trails till morning. I can crush single track as fast as I ever could with this lighting setup. But believe it or not, this actually isn't possible without a computer in each light. Actually, there's 2 computers in each light. Why is that? And do we even want it? Of course, simply bright lights don't require any computing. Any idiot could buy some Air Force surplus lights, wire them to their battery, and immediately go blind, if they wanted to. Woo!
But pure luminosity is only useful in 2 circumstances. One is a flat, straight, perfectly empty road, and the second is when you want to be the biggest dick on the highway. These MTL9s are the biggest dicks on the highway, by the way. They throw 1 lux at 700 meters, which is further than Denali or anybody else. But even Lone Rider recognizes that the 2-degree spotlight is a pure pissing contest. The real challenge and the real value is in building a light that's useful all the time, like around a busy city or off-road. The first thing you'd want is daytime running lights. Because auxiliaries sit low and outboard, they make a triangle with your headlight. Almost nothing on the road makes a triangle, so this draws attention from the four-wheeler whackers. You'd also want a low and wide throw option. This is for illuminating large swaths of terrain because nobody can confidently ride beyond what they can confidently see. Speed on single track depends on knowing your consequences left and right. I also use this mode when rolling into a campsite after dark, makes for less cursing when hunting for tent poles. The third ask would be a short throw high beam. Great for when you don't know what's around the next corner, but even still it needs to be quickly cancelable with my regular dipper switch so I don't annoy anybody. That's where computing comes in, because if I want DRLs, then they should flash in time with my regular indicators, lest the beamer look like a carnival ride. And if I want low and high beams on this dipper switch, then that means that the lights need to converse with the bike's switchgear. And if I want to get any use out of the 700-meter spotlight, then I also need speed modding. Basically, we assume that a higher speed correlates to a longer visible range, so the spot doesn't turn on until I surpass a chosen speed threshold. All of that means that the lights need to speak the same language as the gauge and the instrument cluster, and that language is called CANbus. Many modern motorcycles use controller area networks along a bus topology. This is GS's, but also Tigers, Tuaregs, Tenares, Nordens, Multistradas, Desert X's, even Pan Americas. CANbus is the norm nowadays. Why? Because it saves manufacturers kilometers of wiring. Before 2004, every component on your motorcycle had to be wired back however far to some host computer. So you get lots of wires and lots of relays. But with CANbus, every component is a computer in itself that can send and receive messages along the bus. Say your right rear indicator wants to tell the little green light on your dash to start flashing. It just sends a message that consists of an ID code, that's the name of the little green flasher, and a piece of data, which is turn on. And every component along the bus reads it and says, oh, that's not for me, nope, not me, nope, not me, except the green arrow that says, hey, that's me, I gotta turn on. And the message itself looks something like this. When there's 5 volts on the CAN high wire and 0 volts on the CAN low wire, that's read as a 0, and everything else is read as a 1. And because any electrical interference is going to affect both of the wires equally, this is perfectly immune to electrical noise. It's very clever. It's also hated by the home mechanic because you can't just hook a voltmeter up to a given wire and figure out what is wrong with your motorcycle. If you did, or you put an oscilloscope on it, a CANbus motorcycle would just look like a bunch of digital gibberish that only a dealership with an OBD reader can actually read and make sense of. But there's no point crying over CANbus because this is just how motorcycles are nowadays. Instead, parts manufacturers got to work doubling their own computing power. Of course, we have this first PCBA that tells which LEDs to turn on and when, but on the back, we have also a second PCBA that takes this LIN data and translates it into a more complicated CANbus data sequence that the rest of the motorcycle is actually able to converse with. To quote the President of the United States of America, everything's computer. That does make the install more involved because now I need this, a MotoCAN module to plug the computers into. This is my BMW's bus. I pull their plug Lone Riders in, stick BMW's back into that, and now I have 4 free channels to run my lights and some heated gear and a louder horn, etc, etc. That's one thing that I like about these MTL9s versus the competition. They only use 1 channel for both lights, whereas the competitors use 3, and that only leaves 1 for some other Farkle, and baristas simply will not respect you if you only have 1 Farkle.
Once the CANbus module is plugged in, you have to power it to the battery, then covertly run the leads up to your lights. I'd dry test this Y-splitter before you bury it under the tank because there was a bad batch of cables that escaped the factory.
From here, the rest is digital. You micro USB those computers into this computer, and now I can control everything. A little more brightness on the low beam, maybe a little less on high. Maybe I want my daytime running lights to be white instead of amber. Maybe I want every time I touch the horn to have them strobe for a little bit of added safety or some added get the fuck out of my way. Maybe when I tap the indicator button 3 times, I want it to ignite a beast mode that would launch a solar storm 1 astronomical unit away. And I can cancel that with my usual dipper. So there's no extra buttons cluttering the bars or cluttering my mind. Such is the power of every component being able to fully converse with every other component on the motorcycle. And now that we know why there are 2 computers in something as simple as a motorcycle light, we must ask ourselves if that's even desirable.
I recently drowned an Africa Twin, and just replacing the shorted dash cost
$4,847.56 for this plastic and therefore frequently overheating dash that Honda had to leave porous to the airflow and also the Pacific Ocean. But as many of our commenters rightly pointed out, this is not so much inevitably vulnerable as it is inexcusably cheap.
A proper construction would start with this cast aluminum heatsink. So even at 23,200 lumens and 180 watts, the MTL9 won't cook itself down. It also doesn't break when you make a boo-boo, especially if you run the clip-on lens protectors as well. Then you simply pot the PCBA, which is a jargony way of saying that Lone Rider entombs it in a waterproof epoxy. So yes, these motorcycle lights contain computers in the same way submarines do.
Lone Rider can guarantee that you'll drown the bike before you ever drown their lights because they are ingress protection rated to IP68 and 69, which means that you can leave them submerged underwater or hit them with a high pressure jet at close range. It really doesn't matter.
I took a 2x6 to mine just for science, and they still didn't break. Then I cranked down the bracket just to hold the torture victim more in place, and even that clamp broke before the light was damaged.
Not much, though.
But durability is also where the cost starts to come in. Lone Rider might sponsor this video, but I'll be the first to complain that $1,600 for a pair of lights is more expensive than the last motorcycle that I bought. I get that the IP certs cost a bit, as do the ECE R10, R148, and R149 papers that the communists require for these to be street legal. But even still, I had to ask them straight up, why are these so expensive? And their engineer explained that their biggest investment came in originating a light this smart, with 2 computers inside, that is also properly durable for adventure use. Honda.
Lone Rider burnt 50 units figuring out the thermal dynamics, then they QC'd a whole batch into the garbage bin for a tiny speck on this spot lens, because with Osram LED brightness, any inclusions are gonna smoke. Even still, every light has to go through a burn-in procedure before leaving the factory, because anything plastic, like a circuit board, will have some water content, and with so much heat, that will evaporate and condensate on the cold lens if they don't cook it out.
But I suspect as much as it is precision manufacturing, the price is also just market positioning. Denali D7s cost a couple $100 more despite using a plastic clip-on as a daytime running light. So Lone Rider is able to just let these specs justify themselves to that buyer.
And cost is really the only consideration with auxiliary lighting. Every other Farkle comes with a dilemma. It adds weight, or it gets in the way of something stock, or it's of dubious utility to begin with. But at only 840 grams and a daylight of difference, computerized lighting is a pure positive, if you can afford it. Thanks for watching.